Once upon a time, in Kenyan politics, the Vice President of the Republic of Kenya had just resigned after some very dramatic, never before seen, unprecedented events in our country. Of course, he was not the first Vice President to be forced into resignation. Before him had been the very first Vice President of Kenya, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. But Josephat Karanja's case was different, because first of all, a member of parliament, the MP for Embakasi, had been used to bring down the mighty Vice President of Kenya. But what unfolded after his resignation is what is very relevant to what we're going to discuss today. We had a lot of red herrings in our politics. What are red herrings? Red herrings lead you in the wrong direction. Red herrings give you the wrong conclusion. And in the long list of possible successors to Dr. Karanja, were very many names of politicians in Kenya. Senior politicians, experienced politicians. And it was at around that time that my political lecturer had a long lunch with his close friends, discussing and analyzing Kenyan politics. And he came out of that meeting with a name that nobody would have believed in 100 years. Just by reading the politics correctly and identifying the events which mattered most, my political lecturer and his friends had arrived at the conclusion that President Daniel Toroitich arap Moi was about to appoint a man called Professor George Saitoti as the next Vice President of Kenya. Now, I had a lot of respect for the journalists who were covering politics at that time. They were unique, very talented analysts. But none of them arrived at this conclusion. There was no newspaper in the country, or even weekly political magazine, that came up with this conclusion, very crazy conclusion, that my political lecturer had come to with his friends at a restaurant somewhere in Karen. None of them had the same conclusion. And I believe if any of them had been approached with the same conclusion, they would have just laughed it off. But that is what precisely came to pass. Fast forward to the present. The first telltale clue that things are not what they seem to be are the many, many red herrings. Most of them released by Team Azimio, that will immediately tell an experienced analyst something is happening. People are up to something. Because you see, the motive of releasing red herrings is to keep people busy. You keep them busy eating other stuff, while the really juicy meal, which you have reserved for a few, is being slowly cooked. That's really what it is. Red herring number one. ODM legislators are working very closely with UDA legislators. I'm sure some of you have seen those reports. Indeed, in Parliament, during the voting for Yala members of Parliament, it was very difficult to identify the two opposing sides in our political divide. Virtually impossible. People are voting all over the place. Now, What does this red herring tell us? It tells us that very shortly there must be a handshake of sorts, a union, between the two sides of the political divide. That's what it tells you on the surface. Now there's also something called playing along. You can pretend that unaingia kwa box ya mtu pole pole by accepting some of the things he's saying, by releasing statements that seem to be in favor of that thing. And yet to you're unleashing yet another red herring, to keep people busy. And this is concerning the constitutional amendment to introduce the office of the official leader of the opposition, who will automatically be a member of the National Assembly. His deputy will be a member of the Senate. Now let's not even discuss the BBI and the fact that these proposals were in the BBI, and the fact that some people are saying people are trying to create positions for themselves. This is rubbish. Kenyans should oppose it, trash it. And yet right now, those people are championing this BBI proposal. Let's not go there. Although we've already gone there, but let's not go further. And then the biggest red herring of them all. The Jubilee Party is withdrawing from Azimio shortly. Former President Uhuru Kenyatta is stepping down as the leader of Azimio. Now that one has given people a lot to chew on. Because for starters, the succession debate has started for 2027. As a journalist, you can force the facts to tell your story. Oh yes. Sample this. Murathe says we're still fully behind Baba. He's the one who's going to tell us what to do next. He is our leader. The next morning in the newspapers, Raila is going to vie again in 2027. He's going to be the Azimio candidate, presidential candidate, in 2027. What? Folks, red herrings in politics work, especially when you're experienced and the emotive subjects, the emotive topics, the emotive bones to throw down, which people chew at, fight over, to chew. But what is the real situation? What is the reality concerning where our politics is moving? Now, concerning Jubilee leaving Azimio, I've already discussed that in a previous video. It's actually to Raila Odinga's advantage. So make sure you catch that video. I'll leave a link in the description area below, so you can take it in immediately after this. Then you'll understand. But for now, let's carry on. To be able to identify what is really happening, you must first identify the really important events unfolding in our politics. The kind of events that cannot be faked or stage managed. Those are the ones which should be right at the forefront of your analysis when you're trying to reach a certain conclusion about where we're going with our politics. But of course, the most obvious, the one crying out for attention, is the recent move by Raila Odinga to cancel his parallel Jamhuri Day celebration rallies and instead get onto an aircraft and leave for the United States. Earlier than somebody else, attending the same conference gathering in the United States in Washington, D.C., that is President William Samoei Ruto, who presided over the Jamhuri Day celebrations, the other celebrations, the official ones, if you can call them that, and then later on left for the same place where Raila left for. Now, cancelling something that had been announced and advertised, like the Jamhuri Day parallel celebrations, that is something you can't fake. You can't stage manage. So that one was very real. What does it tell us? The other telltale clue is the fact that there's been no news about this meeting between Raila Odinga, because Raila told us, Biden ameniita, he has invited me. So why haven't we been told by Raila Odinga handlers how that discussion went? We have not even seen any photographs. Now that one also tells you something is up. That is also something you cannot fake or stage manage. But before I tell you what is about to unfold, which you won't believe anyway, but before I tell you that, let me tell you why the William Samoei Ruto presidency does not seem to be working. And let me put the reason in a single sentence. And that sentence is Punda imechoka. Let me start by illustrating something. You can have a situation where robbers always come in to rob a certain circle on the day they're paying their salaries. Okay? It happens this month, skips next month, happens after that, skips another 3 months, happens again. It happens too frequently. Robbers come in, they time the vehicle carrying people's salaries, and they successfully rob it again and again and again. Now it is common sense that one day this particular plot, this plan, will fail to work. Punda itachoka. And this example is even more relevant when you're not even robbing an institution, you're robbing people in a country. And this haste against the people of Kenya started in the 60s. Please just be patient with me. I'll bring everything into perspective up to the latest so that we all understand the super dramatic events and developments that are about to unfold before our very eyes. In the 60s, the people of Kenya were robbed big time. And they were robbed big time when the vice president of the country at that time, indeed the very first vice president in Kenya, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, was pressurized, forced into resignation. And this was rather easy because this was during the Cold War. And Jaramogi received most of his support from Russia, at that time the Soviet Union. That was the excuse. The people of Kenya were not consulted. There was no referendum. The people of Kenya were not consulted over the very, very thorny issues surrounding the circumstances, which were used to get rid of Jaramogi Oginga Odinga from the political scene. Jaramogi tried to make a comeback early during the Moi administration. Jomo Kenyatta passed on and we had a second president. And there was a very spirited effort to get Jaramogi back into politics. Moi himself, who was a very reasonable man, was of course very much aware of this great injustice against the people of Kenya. But powerful forces blocked Jaramogi Oginga Odinga from returning to Kenyan politics. Successfully. They successfully blocked him. Fast forward to 2007. The son of this man, Raila Odinga, indeed his own man in very many ways, won the presidential election. Indeed, there's solid evidence of this, because local media houses were monitoring the results coming in from polling stations. And Raila was leading by more than 1 million votes. And that's the point at which everything went dark. Somebody pulled the plug. Yeah, no more results. Kenyans didn't know what was happening. The next day, it was announced to Kenyans that the winner was actually his opponent, Mwai Kibaki. And this great fraud against the Kenyan people resulted in the clashes. Yeah, we all know that. 2013, Raila Odinga won the presidential elections again. But this time, the system played it very smart. You see, going into those elections, everybody was very wary of a repeat of the horrors of 2007, the post-election problems. Yeah? And of course, these people who are wary knew very well that the issues of 2007 would never have been there had they announced the rightful winner of those elections. They used this as an excuse to limit any information about how the elections was going, to limit even the way people are supposed to behave. When the election results started streaming in, agents were locked out of polling stations, and if anybody tried to raise their voice, they were told, shh, you know what happened in 2007? We can't afford a repeat, so shut up. And so yet again, major fraud against the people of Kenya. The rightful winner did not end up in State House. 2017, and it became very clear that this habit of always robbing the payroll, remember the illustration I gave you? This habit of fraud could not continue for much longer. In fact, 2017 showed any keen observer that a repeat of this same game was very unlikely to work or even go smoothly. But in 2022, elaborate plans were put in place. Now, you tell me, in 2017 it was very clear that this was not going to work for much longer. Will it work in 2022? Tell me what you think. In my opinion, it is rather obvious, very obvious, more than obvious, that this time round, not in 2027, this time round, it will not work. When you see somebody who is very much opposed to the creation of posts, new posts for people, like that of the leader of the opposition, when you see such an individual suddenly change their mind big time, then you know something has changed, and something very major has changed. And that person is under intense pressure. Maybe even they're in trouble. Because it is not human nature for people to wake up in the morning and have a complete about turn, suddenly change their minds in a very major way, and start pushing suddenly for something they were pushing very much against. It's not human nature. So that should tell you a lot. Now, for those who believe in the spiritual and believe it exists, there is no way we can continue like this for long. You have robbed somebody, not once, many, many times. And each time you rob them, you take advantage of their good nature, their good heart, their love for the country, to get them on the negotiation table, and throw a few crumbs at him to keep him quiet. That's really how it has been. The very injustice against that person, let alone the people of Kenya, demands some justice at some point. You see, presidential campaigns cost a fortune. So somebody gets organized, raises their funds for the campaigns successfully, wins the election, and you rob them. And you do it again and again with a straight face. Now, do you think that justice will not come one day for this person you have robbed so many times? Now, before the elections, long before the elections, I had a mind-boggling prophecy, and it puzzled me. According to this prophecy, Raila Odinga is the 5th president of the Republic of Kenya. But then according to this prophecy, Raila Odinga will not come into power through an election. No. He will just walk into State House. Now I asked myself, how is that possible? What can possibly happen to make this prophecy come to pass? And I remained very puzzled. And I remained confused. And I remained skeptical until a few days ago, when the real results in the server, documentary evidence, emerged, and I published those results on this channel. You can look for the video, the real results of 2022 presidential race. Okay, the train has already left the station, but there are circumstances that can force that train to come to a screeching halt. Let me just leave it at that. Because you rob the same house all the time, and each time you get away scot-free. Don't you think? Don't you want to imagine that one day somebody will try the same and it will not work? Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.